Today, I was particularly concerned and interested in two topics, one of which is the conflict in the Middle East, which has already reached a boiling point. Any step, any movement can blow up this powder keg. And we will talk about this, but we will start with a decision by the Supreme Court on customs duties and the president's right to use them, which actually upset me a lot. More precisely, not them, but a specific law related to these duties as a tool of foreign policy pressure on trade partners and on those who are trying to undermine our influence on the planet, and who are doing it in ways that are not exactly honest, peaceful, or anything like that. By the way, I wasn't upset because, as they say, everything failed, everything is terrible, and so on, but because there is always a countermeasure for any force. But because, to be honest, I expected that at least 5 people, maybe not 6, including Roberts, but 5 members of the Supreme Court would be more conservative than I imagined. Let's start with domestic affairs, and then move on to what could become either the greatest achievement of Trump's policy or, well, in case things don't go well, could turn into, let's say, wars or disasters like Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, and so on. Unfortunately, because America has a habit of getting involved in some completely foolish conflicts, and for a very long time. So the Supreme Court. The 6-3 decision overturned the tariffs. Well, according to a certain law, Trump didn't impose all the tariffs. I want to immediately mention the part that is specific to a certain country. For example, tariffs on steel and aluminum remain.
The Supreme Court's decision on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I am ashamed of some members of this court, absolutely ashamed that they did not have the courage to do the right thing in the interests of our country. I would like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength, wisdom, and love for our country, which is now very proud of these justices. When you read the dissenting opinion, there is no way anyone could argue with them, no way at all. Foreign countries that have been profiting off us for years are absolutely thrilled. They're so happy.
The president has lost one of the main tools of foreign policy, while at the same time significantly worsening the position of the U.S. as a producer of goods the country needs. Trump said that he has backup options. It's more complicated than a tariff imposed under this particular law, more complicated than what he was trying to do, and yet very soon. Those who are celebrating, according to him, are dancing in the streets about this, thinking that they will be able to keep fooling us, as he said, and later they will become concerned, meaning they will stop rejoicing. And also on the Donald J. channel, they rejoice at everything that is bad for America, a group of people who can be called opponents of everything that exists in America, or of what America is. These are the Democrats in Congress, the Senate, as well as 3 Supreme Court justices. He meant the 3 Democrats who are on that court.
They are against everything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They are also, frankly, a disgrace to our nation. These judges are in automatic denial. No matter how good your case is, it's a denial, but their loyalty is unquestionable. That's what can be said about some of ours. Others believe that they are politically correct, which has happened before too often with some members of this court, and it has happened so often specifically with this court. What a shame, specifically when it comes to voting, when in reality they are just fools and lackeys for the so-called rhinos and radical left Democrats. And they shouldn't have anything to do with this at all. They are very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. I believe that the court has been influenced by foreign interests and a political movement that is much smaller than people might think. It's a small movement,
It's just a cry from the president's soul. From his point of view, it means he was stabbed in the back out of nowhere. He was building so many good things for the country, and then suddenly, I don't know, so to speak, they cut the ladder out from under him, the one we were all climbing to become a producing country again, to bring prosperity back to Americans.
I used tariffs very effectively last year to make America great again. Our stock market recently surpassed 50,000 points on the Dow Jones Index, and at the same time, and even more remarkably, it surpassed 7,000 on the S&P Index, two indicators that everyone thought would be impossible to reach after our convincing victory in the elections. Just think about it. No one thought it would be possible to do this in 4 years, but we did it in 1 year.
American manufacturers were on the rise. The value of their stocks soared and skyrocketed fantastically. Inflation went down and gas prices dropped.
They said, but you will never be able to do this. Go back and read the geniuses, read their statements. All Nobel laureates in economics, they said, no, you won't be able to do this in 4 years. Well, we did it not in 4 years, but in just 1 year. We broke every imaginable record, and we keep doing it. Tariffs were also used to put an end to 5 out of 8 wars that I settled. I settled 8 wars, whether you like it or not, including India, Pakistan, major nuclear powers which could have gone nuclear. The Prime Minister of Pakistan said yesterday at that important meeting we had that the Peace Council, he said yesterday that President Trump could have saved 35 million lives by making us stop fighting. They were preparing to do something bad, but they provided us with excellent national security. These tariffs, along with our strong borders, have reduced the inflow of fentanyl into our country by 30%. When I use them as punishment against countries that illegally send this poison into our country to poison our youth, all these tariffs remain. They all remain. I don't know if you know this or not. They all remain. We are still getting them, and we will continue to. After the decision, I guess there's no one else to turn to. But again, these 3 command so much respect. I already respected them a lot, but now I have such enormous respect. But other alternatives will now be used to replace those that the court mistakenly rejected. We have alternatives, just great alternatives.
I've never seen Trump so upset, probably not even when he was being impeached. Both times he looked better, more combative, somehow more optimistic. But what can he do if he can't impose tariffs the way he used to? Time.
But I am allowed to stop any trade or business relations with that same country. In other words, I can destroy trade. I can even destroy the country itself. I am even allowed to impose an embargo that completely destroys another country. I can impose an embargo. I can do absolutely anything I want, but I can't take even a single dollar from them, because that's not written in the terms and isn't even implied by the meaning of what's written. I can treat them however I see fit, but I have no right to demand any money from them. So I'm allowed to destroy an entire country. But I can't even take a small fee from them. I could take a tiny fee, like 2 cents, but under no circumstances can I take anything from them. Think about it. How ridiculous is that? I'm allowed to impose an embargo on them. I'm allowed to tell them, Doris, you can no longer do business in the U.S. We want you to leave here. But if I want to take $10 from them, I can't do that.
I want you to understand the absurdity and at the same time the possibility of putting pressure on the partners that Trump has. He could say tomorrow that we won't buy anything from France, and you won't be able to import anything to us, and no one has the right to stop him. That is, they can file a lawsuit, they can do this, they can do that, but it takes at least 3 months, 6 months, or at least 6 months, and sometimes in some cases up to 4 years to stop him. Neither the court nor Congress can stop him any faster, and naturally France takes a hit. So what should be done? He crawls to Trump and says, what if we pay everything you ask for, which the Supreme Court has forbidden, but we do it voluntarily, we'll bring it to the cash register ourselves. And Trump says, well, if it's voluntary, then go ahead, bring your cheese and wine so that France can bring its cheese and wine here. And the president also has the right to license goods coming from other countries, for example, importing them into the US, like Mercedes. Let's say you'll get a license only if you prove that you can fly, which you can't. You can't fly. So we won't give a license to sell in the US until it takes off again. There are lawsuits, disputes, all that. For now, Mercedes hasn't been imported for 6 months.
I have the right to license, I have the absolute right to license, but not the right to collect a licensing fee, so think about that. I have the right to license, which is a very strong word. In many ways, a license is more powerful than tariffs. Actually, I thought about that, but they came up with the idea that I can issue licenses just like those who were against me told them to, but without the right to collect a licensing fee. Just think about that.
It sounds idiotic, but you have to look into it because Trump likes to exaggerate a little. But listen, you can't take money anymore, but you can do that.
But now the court has given me the undeniable right to ban the import of all sorts of things into our country. To destroy foreign states is a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we had, but not the right to charge a fee.
It's insane how much this reminds me of an old Jewish joke. A groom comes to the rabbi and says, "Rebbe, tell me, can I dance slow dances with my wife?" Hugging each other. "Absolutely not," says the rabbi. "Well, all right," replies the groom. "Okay, let's move on to other questions, to questions about sex. For example, in what position, let's say I'm on top, my wife is on the bottom, is that allowed?" The rabbi says, "That's allowed." And for example, sitting or squatting, is that allowed? The rabbi says, "That's allowed." "And standing?" asks the groom. "Absolutely not," says the rabbi. "Why?" the groom asks in surprise. "Well, because," says the rabbi, "it could accidentally turn into a dance." It's the same here. You can require licenses, but you can't charge for them because that could accidentally lead to a tax. And you can prohibit the import of goods, completely destroy, so to speak, trade with any country. But you can't take a single penny from them, period. 3 Supreme Court justices think the same as Trump, they believe. They wrote what's called a minority opinion, meaning their own opinion, and it matches Trump's opinion, Latnick's opinion, and Bueller's opinion. And, excuse me, but with mine as well.
As Judge Kavanaugh, whose authority has grown so much, you should see I'm so proud of him, wrote in his separate opinion. Although I strongly disagree with today's decision of the court, this decision may, in fact, not significantly limit the president's ability to impose tariffs in the future. So, and now here's the thing, think about it, this decision may not significantly restrict it.
That is, you must never stick your tongue out to the left, but to the right, as much as you want. It's even encouraged.
Actually, I can charge much more than I used to, so I'll just get started. Although I strongly disagree with today's court ruling, this decision may not significantly limit the president's ability to impose tariffs in the future. That's because many other federal laws, which is absolutely true, give the president the authority to impose tariffs. And they could justify most, if not all, of the tariffs imposed in this context, in this particular case, and actually even more tariffs. These laws include, just think about it, these laws include, for example, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, Section 232. I know all these things so well. The Trade Act of 1974, Sections 122, 201, 301, and the Tariff Act of 1930, Section 338. It's clear, but the process is a bit longer. Moving on. I thought I would simplify everything, but we weren't allowed to do that. I want to thank Judge Kavanaugh for his frankly brilliance and his outstanding abilities. I'm very proud of this appointment. Actually, why? Although I'm sure they didn't want to do it. Today's Supreme Court decision has made the president's ability to both regulate trade and impose tariffs much more powerful and absolutely clear.
We told you about Trump having more tricks up his sleeve. You know, backup options, ways out of the situation. Here, the Supreme Court justices themselves are showing him that this is not allowed. Well, it's absolutely not allowed under any circumstances. You can't dance to the left, you can't dance while standing, but it turns out you can squat because that won't turn into a dance, even though the result is the same. In other words, the Supreme Court's decision allows the president to increase pressure on trade partners. Temporarily, maybe for 6 months, maybe for 4 years, or even forever. No, not forever. In just 4 years, everything will be completely destroyed.
There will no longer be any doubts about the stability of incoming revenues, and the protection of our companies and the entire country will actually increase significantly thanks to this court decision. I don't believe the court meant that, but unfortunately, that's what they're saying. That's what they meant. Unfortunately, I can do anything I want with IEPA. Absolutely anything. I just can't charge anyone for it. I can issue licenses, but I can't charge for them. It's absurd, but it's not a big deal because we have other ways, plenty of other ways. The ability to block, embargo, restrict, license, or impose any other conditions on a foreign state's ability to trade with the United States under the IEPA was fully affirmed by this decision. Now, there's no doubt, since there were many questions about tariffs, after all, no president was smart enough to use them to protect our country from those countries and companies that were ripping us off.
If you don't praise yourself, well, but actually that means he's right. I don't know anyone who has done more for the country than Trump, and who they tried to stop so desperately and stupidly. And he's upset not because things aren't going well or the project failed, but because he didn't expect to be hit by as many as 3 conservative judges. But now we know for sure, because this decision confirms all those provisions that some people doubted in order to protect, and it is stated directly, to protect our country. The president can actually impose much higher tariffs than I did throughout last year under various tariff authorities. Thus, we can apply other provisions of the law, other tariff regulations, which have also been confirmed and are fully permissible. Therefore, all tariffs for national security reasons take effect immediately. According to Section 232 and the existing tariffs under Section 301, which have already been introduced and are in effect, remain in force, and fully effective. Today, I will sign an order to introduce a 10% global assistance under Section 122 on top of our regular tariffs that are already being collected. We are also initiating several investigations under Section 301, among others, to protect our country from unfair trade practices by other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I'll put it quite simply, as I've said for a long time. Let's make America great again, and interestingly, we've already made it great. I don't need to repeat it, but I don't think we'll ever give up MAGA. MAGA will always be with us. MAGA will be... So the global emergency tariffs that Trump created have been canceled, or rather, he didn't create them. He invoked this law, so to speak, and announced that he would act under this law in 2025. At the same time, the basic customs duties, the so-called tariff grid, remain in place, as do all anti-dumping tariffs and those related to national security, for example, for steel production. Specific sanctions, as they are called, also remain. That is, if you behave badly with us, then we impose sanctions. Those introduced for certain actions by a country or company, all of that stays in place. No one has challenged them so far. Maybe in the future someone will, but as of today, no one has challenged them. For example, higher tariffs remain on some Chinese and Brazilian goods imposed through regular trade law sanctions. But they are cutting, that is, removing the extra 10% urgent surcharge because of the law that now prohibits them from imposing it. And in response to the court's decision, Trump has already announced that he is signing an order for a replacement. Those 10% that are not allowed, are being replaced with completely different, but also 10% which are also not allowed. They mean global imports, global tariffs on imports. And then for the countries he wants, he will cancel them, give them a concession. So basically, it's the same thing, one way or another, but under different names, which is very important. Yes, this measure is in effect for 150 days. Otherwise, well, 150 days, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, you understand that this is not 1 month or 2, right? After that, Congress must either approve or cancel it. Trump slightly exaggerated his capabilities, but nevertheless, they are quite extensive. He can block any deal. He has every right to do so. Then you can appeal it in court. They'll judge something there. Quickly, they'll make a decision. He can freeze the assets of the importer and exporter. He can prohibit certain operations, including through the licensing system. Trump can stop imports. Well, from a certain region, let's say from Russia or Belgium or Bangladesh, it doesn't matter. But under the national security section, Trump can restrict the import of some of the things that the country would like to import. And he can use tariffs up to 15% on anything, but for a period of up to 150 days. And the Supreme Court confirmed his right as president to do this. It's true that Trump won't be able to completely shut off imports with a single stroke of a pen. This would immediately collapse in the courts, of course, but he can launch a combination of investigations, impose temporary bans, say, some non-tariff restrictions, sanction bans, basically all sorts of chaos. And although each such action is limited in time or percentage, yes, it will be a big, huge problem for importers and will look to businesses like a complete blockade. Because if you don't import something for a year or two, someone else will import it instead of you. And then all the countries, everyone, and at that point it's already in court, but the court can't do anything. People don't want to buy from you. They've started buying from someone else. Are there Trump tariffs? There were, well, let's say just a simple arbitrary switch. Yeah, you just took it, let's say, and turned everything off. That's it. The current situation is within the framework of specific narrower laws. For example, finding that the increase in imports is causing serious harm to the United States of America. Well, let's say, so to speak, here's the thing. We've already discussed antibiotics with you. Yes, antibiotics. Trump can impose a tariff of up to 50% for up to 4 years. Why? Because Trump decided, and his advisors decided, that this import causes significant harm to national security, which is probably true. Yes, so these 4 years will be more than enough for Trump to put pressure on the importer. Naturally, Trump has already been deprived of an easy tool, but he still has a bunch of other, more complicated tools that already exist in the laws and are authorized by Congress. Some for 6 months, some up to 15%, some up to 4 years. It seems that Trump's team will now have to rush around different countries and explain to all our partners that they won't get much relief from just rearranging the components. By the way, here's a great explanation of the problem and the solution. This is the former United States Trade Representative. Well, see for yourself.
First of all, let's remember that President Trump's thesis hasn't changed. The old trade system was bad. It slowed economic growth for at least 30 years, and it slowed down American innovation. This had serious consequences for our workers, for their wages, for their jobs, and many other negative effects that had a very bad impact on the country. None of this has changed or was discussed in the Supreme Court. The president plans to change the presidential system he began in his first term in the Biden administration. This hasn't changed much, and now he's taking the logical next step. This is what he was concerned about and cared for, these working people and this economic growth. Since he turned 35, none of this has changed, so he used IEPA. It was simple, it was flexible. I suppose he had a better a better legal argument, but basically the fact is that this was always potentially a problem. It will be canceled, and I think the administration is prepared for that. They haven't talked about it. They're very smart lawyers. Jameson Greer knows how all this works. They have a backup plan. You saw the beginning of it today. It will be messier. It will be more difficult, but this won't change the president's leverage in economic policy and trade matters. And I think ultimately the tools we will use to fix this very bad situation will still be tariffs. And now the president believes that it will be proportional. The worst countries will get the highest tariffs, and our friendly trading partners will get moderate ones. And we will have a new system that will change the economy, help workers, and its longevity will not depend on the Supreme Court.
So what's actually happening on the fronts in the Middle East? The president says he's giving Iran 10 to 15 billion.
The president is giving Iran 10 to 15 days to end its nuclear program as American military forces are being deployed.
The president's deployment to the Middle East, which is reportedly the largest buildup since the Iraq War in 2003.
So, the Wall Street Journal reports that President Trump is considering a limited strike to force the regime to act. The president says the ball is in Iran's court.
Sir, what would be the objective if there is a U.S. military strike?
Well, we'll make a deal or we'll get a deal, one way or another.
But a military strike should destroy their nuclear program.
I'm not going to talk to you about that, but either we'll make a deal or it won't be very good for them.
Then, since they can't leave, set them a deadline. It's time to make a deal.
I would think that 10 to 15 days would be enough.
So Iran is given 10 to 15 days for what?
Reports say the deadlock led President Trump to consider a limited initial strike to push Iran into an agreement. As the Wall Street Journal reports, the initial attack, if approved, could occur within days and target several military or government sites, according to sources familiar with the situation. If Iran refuses to comply with President Trump's directive to stop nuclear enrichment, the U.S. will respond with a large-scale campaign against regime facilities, potentially aimed at overthrowing the Tehran regime. In a few days, the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Edward, will reach the eastern Mediterranean. Last night, it reached the Strait of Gibraltar. Meanwhile, this morning, Iran issued a new threat against the United States, stating that if the United States continues to speak to Iran in the language of force, Iran will reciprocate using the same language.
In other words, if you threaten us, says Iran, then we will threaten you. By the way, here's what experts in the United States have been saying for the past 10 days.
For 15 days, we've been in a countdown phase to potential strikes on Iran. Carly, we know that these targets were presented back in January, and let me make it clear, this is not a ground operation. Most likely, Iran will get its missile production facilities bombed if they don't agree to negotiations.
How will the use of military action lead to a regime change? When the Ayatollah is living in a bunker and still has loyalists in the IRGC, tell us about that and how regime change could actually happen with the involvement of the American military.
That would mean applying significant pressure to key points, likely involving targets related to leadership in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But I should note, President Trump has made it absolutely clear that the top priority is really to bring the nuclear deal to a logical conclusion. Therefore, I believe military facilities are the highest priority. It would be just wonderful to see this regime disappear.
Let me, so to speak, explain something at the end about our American schedule. On Tuesday at 6 p.m. Washington time, Trump delivers his annual State of the Union address. Well, that's what we call it here. And every president always gives it first. Usually 2 months into the new year, he gives a speech about what has happened and how he sees, so to speak, moving into the future. For the next year, probably the whole country listens to it. They say that 40 million families turn on their TVs. And so the following topics are expected in his speech. First of all, the illegal invasion of migrants into our country has been completely stopped, so to speak. Trump did it without any new laws, without any new resources or anything else, completely close the border, proving and showing that the people who didn't want to close it before were doing it on purpose. Despite the aggressive resistance from the Democratic Party, the deportation of illegal immigrants is underway, and it started with criminal individuals. Special attention will be given, of course, to the cost of living, lowering gas prices, reducing inflation and economic growth. New enterprises and new jobs are being created naturally after the Supreme Court decision we discussed. Part of the speech will be about how the U.S. will now put pressure on its partners to open their countries to American goods, and how to protect industries necessary for U.S. national security. Trump will, of course, talk about lowering drug prices, and very significant reductions are expected. I think that in a couple of months, the famous website will go live, where at first one company and then, I believe, 12 companies will participate. They will be selling all the same things they sell now in the U.S., but at about 20 to 30% of the price they currently charge. Then, of course, he will talk about NATO, about strengthening NATO, about how the alliance countries will have to meet the conditions for funding their military expenses. Naturally, Iran, Russia, and Ukraine will be mentioned in the speech, but perhaps there will also be an announcement of a plan for the destruction of Hamas in the Middle East, a plan to stop Iran's nuclear program, and a plan to turn Gaza into a flourishing garden. The only thing I think is that China, Venezuela, and other regions will be mentioned just in a general sentence, in a general paragraph, and in passing. I don't think much attention will be given to this, including other hotspots and potential adversaries. But of course, in this speech, Iran will be given an ultimatum, and whatever is promised to Iran, whatever is said publicly, that's what will actually happen. On February 24th, we will hear what and when will be done with the United States, Israel, and Britain. Are there conditions like first, second, third, fourth, and so on that won't be fulfilled? Personally, I think the U.S. will bomb Iran in 3 waves. First, then a break. Second, a break. If not, then the third. First, it's all the known missile launch sites. Second, all the barracks, warehouses, headquarters, and bases of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And third, so if Iran doesn't break, then it's the bunkers and places where the leadership is hiding. I don't know if the U.S. has a plan B involving bringing in Shah Pahlavi, he's the son of the well-known Shah, or if there are any agreements with the army generals specifically. Not the Corps, yes, those are completely different things, although in terms of numbers, they're probably about the same, but the army is much more poorly equipped than the Corps. But it's exactly the Corps that the Americans and Israelis will be targeting in order to give the army an opportunity. If it decides to go for an armed rebellion and uprising so that it can do this, so to speak, without significant losses. I hope that the Iranian opposition is working and in a way serves as a connecting link. So in our chain, there is the army, so to speak, the population there and so on. Yes, if the raids are successful and the army follows the Shah, then with the help of the Israelis, the regime will be changed to one friendly to the U.S., Israel, and the Western world. But we will find out the time frame on Tuesday. By the way, yes, maybe from Tuesday evening to Wednesday. I was thinking that maybe right after the speech, we might start this very operation. Yes, but we will definitely start. I don't know when, but we will definitely start. Because if Iran doesn't at least do one thing related to its nuclear program, doesn't completely shut it down and let us in. We go in there while all our ships and everything else are still nearby. We go in, destroy the entire site from the inside, check to make sure there are no other sites. But I think that because we work with the Iranian opposition, we know pretty well where everything is located. And after destroying all these sites, then we, so to speak, withdraw our ships and start negotiations on other important matters. Okay, well, that's all, gentlemen. On Tuesday, I'll leave, as I already said. There will be a very important speech by Trump from which we will learn, first of all, what the administration will be doing in the coming years. I would put it this way. In the coming years, first until the elections in November and then until the elections in 2028, That's basically it. If you have any questions, please ask, because I would be happy to think about topics that interest you and try to answer, if I can, of course. Goodbye.